Good morning. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc., an alternative parties books publisher, sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bouchard.
Hello.
Hello, greetings. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast.
Thanks for having me.
We're glad to have you. Friends, today we have Christopher Pearson from the National Popular Vote. He's going to talk to us about an electoral reform issue that you will be excited about. So welcome, Christopher.
Thanks for having me. Are we recording already?
We are indeed. So
Right.
if you can kindly give us an introduction to yourself, a brief biographical sketch for our audience.
Sure. So I'm Chris Pearson. I work with National Popular Vote, which is a state-based effort to reform the Electoral College, create a popular vote, one person, one vote, get the most votes, you win. I also serve in the Vermont State Senate, and I run for office as a duly nominated by the Progressive Party and the Democratic Party.
All right. So kindly tell us when the National Popular Vote organization got started.
Sure. We got started in 2006. And our bill, because states control the Electoral College, our bill depends on a number of states joining together so that in order to create a popular vote, we have to have states that hold 270 electors, a majority of the electors. We started in 2006. Maryland became the first state to pass our bill in 2007. And we're now up to 15 states plus the District of Columbia. Together, those states have 195 electors. So we need states with 75 more electors before we have a popular vote for president.
Sounds good. So kindly tell us what arguments are in favor of National Popular Vote versus the way we have it right now.
Sure. Well, I would argue strongly that the way we elect the president is broken, badly damaged, hurts the country. It hurts our democracy. It hurts voters. It hurts most states. And that's for a number of reasons. One is you can get the most votes and not win the election. That's pretty strange. The second is our election process is highly concentrated in a small number of battleground states. So, for instance, in the 2020 election, 94% of the campaign, if you measure where the candidates were spending money and where they were visiting and holding rallies, 94% of the whole election in the fall was in 12 states. And that holds true. I think it was 96% of the 2016 election was in 12 states. And in fact, 100% of the 2012 election took place in 12 states. So voters in 70% of the country are completely taken for granted. They don't visit us. They don't poll us. They don't advertise to us. There's no grassroots activity. We are taken for granted as we sit on the sidelines. I live in Vermont. If you want to get involved in a presidential election in Vermont, you get in your car and drive to New Hampshire because New Hampshire is a so-called battleground state. Now, what does that mean for the country? Well, it means 70% of voters live in states that are basically safe, reliable blue states or red states, right? Democratic states or Republican states. And I live in a blue state. It's not like the Democrats cater to us. Joe Biden never came to visit us in Vermont because he knows he's already won and it doesn't do him any good. He's not going to make Vermont any bluer. And he doesn't visit voters in Idaho because he couldn't possibly win Idaho. And so we have a system that routinely shuts out 70% of voters who are effectively not part of a campaign. This has an impact on voter participation, on down ballot races, and then beyond the election, it has an impact on things like No Child Left Behind waivers, disaster declarations, things that are directly under the control of the chief executive. tend to favor battleground states because, they're looking to get reelected or have their party continue. So all of that is really damaging. We also have the fact that if you look at 2020, our most recent election, Joe Biden won by 7 million votes, over 7 million votes. In fact, the election was in question for a couple of weeks because the margin in the key pivotal states of Arizona, Wisconsin, and Georgia was less than 23,000 votes. So a margin of 7 million votes doesn't guarantee you the White House. In fact, we could well have seen the election go to the second place candidate, back to Trump, had 23,000 voters change their mind that happen to live in Arizona, Wisconsin, and Georgia. 23,000 total, mind you. So there's a sort of integrity, security kind of issue in the way we elect the president right now. Under a popular vote, it's just very straightforward. One person, one vote, get the most votes, you win. Your vote in rural Wisconsin is just as valuable as downtown Manhattan. Candidates are forced to campaign in all 50 states. We have a much broader discussion. A small state like mine, the candidates probably won't shower us with attention, but right now we are completely taken off the table. And so we're not part of a discussion. Under a popular vote, the Democrats are going to say to blue state like Vermont, hey, we always win Vermont. Can can you get me 5,000 more votes out of Vermont because I'm getting creamed in Alabama? And actually the Republicans in Vermont will say, hey, I haven't cared what I lose by previous to this, but under popular vote, it matters. And can we shrink the margin, right? Today, the Democrat in Idaho.
Hello? So you were saying Democrat in Idaho?
I was saying that the Democrats have no motivation to campaign in Idaho today, and they don't care if they lose Idaho by 7% or 17%, right? They're going to lose the electors. Under a popular vote, they would be motivated to shrink the margin. They're still not going to win the state, quote unquote, but they're going to try to contest for every vote. And in that way, that's replicated across the country. And it would be, in my mind, very positive for our ownership for most Americans who are currently left out and taken for granted.
So how do you plan to implement this? You were mentioning earlier about getting the states to get their legislation passed. Is that the strategy, to get each state to get it passed?
Yeah, so the states control the Electoral College, and the U.S. Constitution says, Article 2, Section 1 says, each state shall, each state, oh my God, I'm blanking out. It gives states complete power over their own electors. Each state shall appoint in a manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors. So in Vermont, we get 3 electors. In New York, they get 29. And the state law determines how those electors behave. Most states, 48 states, have passed what's called the winner-take-all law. So when Joe Biden gets 1 vote more than Donald Trump in Vermont, he wins all 3 electors. That's the winner-take-all law. But that's just state law. National popular vote has already been passed in 15 states plus DC. And we're waiting for more states to come on board, such that we need to get a states that hold a majority of the electors before it takes effect. Once we get that threshold, so states that hold 270 electors, what those states are saying through this law is, it doesn't matter what happens in our own state. We're going to have an election, add up the popular votes in all 50 states plus DC, and whichever candidate gets the most votes will be guaranteed this block of 270 electors by virtue of the National Popular Vote bill. And therefore, they'll be guaranteed to go to the White House. It will be one person, one vote. Get the most votes, you win the election.
On the fact sheet that you kindly provided to me about your organization, it mentioned the history of winner take all. And if I read it correctly, it said our start of our country, they started to do winner take all, but then they changed. So what's the history of this national popular
Sure.
vote?
Well, so that in the very first presidential election, 3 states used winner take all. Then they all repealed it, in fact. And for many decades, states were trying different systems of awarding electors as the new country was kind of figuring it out. By the 1830s, all states had shifted to winner take all, and that was really a political decision where some states were carving up their electors, so giving 5 to one candidate and 4 to another, um, and then watching other states like Massachusetts, for instance, just going all to winner take all. And so um, there was kind of a political motivation for states to adopt winner take all, but it's not in the Constitution. It wasn't endorsed by the founders or anything like that. And in fact, it's a state power. The Supreme Court's called it a plenary power. In other words, it's only belongs to state legislatures to um, to decide how their electors will work.
A lot of people mention and are concerned with campaign finance. So would a national popular vote, if we implemented that, would that have a positive effect on the problems with campaign finance?
Well, I think in a way it would, in that it would be very empowering to the grassroots. Like I use my state as an example. In Vermont, there are probably a few dozen Democratic Party volunteers and a few dozen Republican Party volunteers who will take the time to get in their car and drive 100 miles to door knock and get engaged in New Hampshire, which is a battleground state nearby. Um, but if you have a popular vote, there's no reason to travel anymore to other states. And so the grassroots everywhere would get empowered to hold campaign events, talk to voters. Candidates who for the legislature and more local offices would also engage in the presidential election, which doesn't happen now except for battleground states. So I think you'd have a stronger role for grassroots, and in my mind that diminishes some of the role for big money. It is important to note that right now there's record spending and tons of big money. It's a big problem in my opinion. um, Tons of big money going into presidential elections, and all of that money is spent in 8 to 12 states. It's enormously concentrated in the battleground states. um, so if you switch to a popular vote, those resources will be spread around the country. But there's no reason to think that will lead to an explosion of spending, because Joe Biden doesn't say no, keep your check. I've only got to compete in 12 states. They're raising all the money they can. Every 4 years we set records of spending. It's just that the spending is concentrated intensely into just a dozen states. So it's not a huge, to my mind, a popular vote doesn't solve our campaign finance challenges at all, but it does empower the grassroots in a way that some argue will diminish the impact of big money.
What are some arguments people have against this, and how do you counter those arguments?
I would say the most prevalent argument against this is that somehow, if you count every vote equally and guarantee the White House to the candidate gets the most votes, that the cities that are big cities will have too much influence, that the entire power will be concentrated in the cities, or in big states like New York and California will control the election. Some version of that argument is probably what we hear the most. In fact, the math says otherwise. New York and California make up 18% of the country. And of course, they're not a monolith. There's plenty of Republicans in both of those states. They approach 40% of the vote. And you can't just talk about New York and California and ignore Florida and Texas, which tend to be two red states that are also really big. In fact, now Florida is the second biggest, most populous state. So that counter to the argument is to look at the arithmetic involved. When we talk just about cities, people tend to think that our cities, that we have more cities and that they're bigger than they really are. The 100th biggest city is Arlington, Texas, has about 300,000 people. According to the 2010 census, there's less than 10 cities with more than 1 million people. And in fact, the population of the 100 biggest cities is about 19% of the country. And in fact, as it happens, rural Americans make up about 19% of the population. So we're in fact quite balanced that way. The other way to look at it is to take a state like Pennsylvania. It has big cities and has a lot of rural voters. Trump famously carried Pennsylvania in 2016. That was pivotal to his taking the White House. He did not win Philadelphia. He did not win Pittsburgh. So those cities weren't enough to carry Hillary Clinton in just within the state. And so we just have to look at the data and help people understand that rural voters are critical to winning. There are countless examples of Republican governors in New York that never won Manhattan, and in California that didn't win the big cities, and in fact George W. Bush carried Ohio, didn't win any of the cities there. So you can look at the data of what's really happened throughout the history of our elections and try to counter it, but people do come back to this myth quite a lot.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I read that your organization has a book on this topic. Kindly
Yes,
explain the book and where people can get it.
sure, you can get it on Amazon, or if people reach out through the website, nationalpopularvote.com, we'd be glad to send people a copy. It's called Every Vote Equal, and it is sort of an authoritative textbook on the history of the Electoral College, the history of attempts at reforming the Electoral College, and the argument for state action to maintain the Electoral College, but in fact change to a popular vote for president. So Every Vote Equal. Take a look. You can order it on Amazon or shoot us an email. I'm sure we can find a copy to send to listeners that might be interested.
Excellent. So kindly tell our audience how they can support your organization.
The best way that people can help us is to visit nationalpopularvote.com and click on the Take Action button. That is a web tool. It makes it really easy to contact your local legislator. And, this is an issue. Popular vote for president is a popular idea, right? Since the 1940s, Gallup has been polling this question, and routinely 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 4 American voters supports a popular vote for president. But for state legislators, our topic is not always front of mind. And so people reaching out to their local state reps and their local state senators is really, really important, and engaging them in a dialogue and saying, hey, why shouldn't we use one person, one vote, guarantee the candidate with the most votes wins the election? Please support National Popular Vote. That's really vital. And our website makes it very easy for people to engage. And it would be wonderful to have the more voices, the better from our point of view.
Sounds great. So we thank you for coming onto our program today, and we wish your organization all the best with this endeavor.
Well, thanks for reaching out, and I appreciate the discussion.
Have yourself a wonderful day and all the best.
Bye-bye. Thank you.